Mr. Bernstein, take it away.
And here we are, October 23rd already, and it's Tinderbox Meetup. I'm Mark Bernstein, the creator of Tinderbox. This week, I believe we're going to tackle a problem that came up on the forum on Thursday. I wrote one suggestion, but Michael Becker has another suggestion based on regular expressions. And here is Michael Becker.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Tinderbox session. Great to see you all. As always, the goal here is to talk all things Tinderbox and knowledge management. We introduce new people that are new to the forum or the weekly meetup. I don't see anyone new. So therefore, we then switch on to projects that people are working on. And then once we've addressed people's concerns, questions, immediate projects they're working on, we move into a weekly theme. And I've got a weekly theme for us to work on. And then if we have time permitting at the end, I will demonstrate my meeting note parsing action item extravaganza project that Mr. Anderson and I have been working on. So it's pretty cool. So with that in mind, I don't see anyone new. So let's jump to the second phase of the agenda, which is who's working on what and has a project or question that they'd like to address. Anybody got anything? Don't all run out at once. Mr. Bernstein, do you have something?
You're muted, sir.
You're on mute.
Here we go. New setup. Great. The backstage. If you are backstage, we've been working on a series of new Tinderbox builds that improve image handling. If you use lots of images, give a thought to joining backstage if you're not already there. If that's a hardship, write to me and we can do something. But the change in handling of images is significant, and it would be good to have input from people who use lots and lots of images or would like to use lots and lots of images.
And when you say hardship, Mark, I believe what you're referring to, if it's an economic hardship to join backstage, call you and you'll work with somebody. And primarily, I think that's true, because if somebody's working with a lot of images, you need more fodder to be able to test against. So that would be really good.
Yeah, I think it's also worth throwing in the idea of a lot of images, I mean, as well as putting them in. Part of the sort of, it's pick any two of three type thing is that if you want everything to be in one file so it all travels along, well, it's got to be encoded in the file. And the file at the moment is some nice, well-formed XML, and that doesn't play so well with globs of binary data. Or, well, do you go for an envelope type thing, as in something like a Word document that's actually an envelope? It's a hidden folder of lots of stuff, which is fine, but it transpires that these arrived in the ecosystem just about the time that people were doing cloud technology. And a lot of the cloud systems don't cope very well with files, containers and masquerade as files. So that there's no obvious easy win, and some interesting stuff to be done. So those were the need to have, 100 thumbnails in their text because they need it. Might want to play along for this one.
Yeah, and I'll play along with you a little bit more in the backstage too, Mark, because I've got some unique peculiarities, as you know, that we don't necessarily need to bring up publicly in the front stage. So let's go ahead. Hey, Bruce, nice to see you. And Mr. Art, getting a nice show. And hey, Philip. So I feel like Romper Room, Hi, Andy. So let's go to, do we want to go to the theme, or does somebody else have any other questions or comments?
Michael, this is actually pretty important. Does Romper Room translate outside the United States?
I don't know if it does. There was a television show in the 70s called Romper Room, where it basically was like a kindergarten class filmed on TV. And then the show always opened up with the teacher holding up a mirror and looking through the mirror and saying hi to all the students. So that's where it came from. So a little bit mental blast from the past. Mr. Peter.
Yes, I have a little bit of an issue, and I'm not sure the best way to approach it. What I want to do is find the nearest ancestor of my current note that has an attribute explicitly set on it.
Nearest in what sense?
nearest in the outline order at a higher level in the outline that has the attribute explicitly set. Basically, I'm creating a LaTeX document, so I want to have LaTeX sectioning commands, but I have intermediate stuff in between, so I can't just look at the outline depth of my note because it might be several levels deeper than the semantic depth of the note in terms of sectioning elements. So I want to be able to look back up through the ancestor chain to find the first ancestor of the note that had an explicit section level associated with it so that I can figure out what sectioning level I want to get and have that automatically update as I drag things around through the hierarchy. So basically, it's not an explicit hierarchy, it's like an implicit hierarchy layered on top, or like a sparse ancestry tree inside of the real ancestry tree. Because some of the notes that are ancestors are totally irrelevant for the purposes of figuring out the sectioning semantics.
So
I'm
I'm
not sure how to
watching
go
Mark
about doing that.
Bernstein's face as you're describing this, Peter. Mark, this was going to be your next feature, right?
I think that this is nature's way of telling you that you've chosen a difficult representation, and that unless you're actually getting leverage out of this from someplace else, you might consider choosing an easier one.
So what you're saying is, doctor, it hurts when I do this. His response is, well, then don't do that.
Well,
But-
whenever you find yourself having to do acrobatics on your data structure, I mean, this can certainly be done, but you already have an ancestry tree that is easy to work with. And here, like, you're, instead of saying the father of the note, the parent of the note, you have to do a fairly considerable computation to find the parent of any note. And maybe you want to think about whether whatever this is saving you in effort is actually saving more effort than this computation is going to cost.
See, if I was going to express it in closed form, I'd call it ancestral. So I could say the ancestral section, and
Yeah.
that would walk up through the answer and find the first explicitly set non-default value for section, and then that would be the value that I'd get out of it. That's why
Yeah,
I'm looking.
well, write a function that walks up the parentage chain and stops when it gets to something that has an immediate value.
We
And
can do
Mark
that.
Anderson, I've forgotten, you requested the operator that says whether the value is
Yep.
immediate, but
I'm just
I've
looking it
forgotten
up
what
and
it is.
I'm looking it up and I'm about to paste it.
Okay,
Here we
That
go.
would be what I'd need to do it.
the crucial predicate is about to go onto the chat.
Okay, that'll let me get there then.
So
Ah,
you can- yeah, so there is it's one of these things that, of course, you look at it in the toolbox and that awful fear of missing out. You think, how do I use that? Well, here's one of the times where you want to say, right, I've got a whole lot of things, but which one of these has a local value for this attribute? And that's what it does. So you could
yeah, that's
say,
cool.
so for
Great.
instance, the ancestors designator will give you a set that is all the ancestors of the note that you're interrogating, and then you can iterate that set and you say, right, do you have, is Mr. Bunn the baker at home? Do you have for this note, do you have attribute XYZ? Does it have a value, which is what has local value does? And then bingo.
Well, more
you get
importantly, does it have a
matching.
local value as opposed to an inherited one from the prototype?
Yes, well, and then you can go further down the rabbit hole. Yes, because depending on how many levels of removal, and this goes back to Mark's point, sometimes it may be that what you're actually doing is discovering the fact that this is where you may want to refactor some of the ways that you're doing inheritance and things, or you may want to cache. You may literally basically may want to make a local global variable, so a local global variable. In other words, you might just find a note and you put a value for an attribute in there, whether it's used for anything else or not, because you just know that that's the easiest way you're going to find that. But that process normally comes out of going through all the pain of saying, I'm finding this really hard to find the thing I want. I know it's there, but I can't find the right magic incantation to get it. Does that help?
Yeah, because basically the reason I got into this situation is I'm using Tinderbox to create new web source files. So in new web, you have major commands for creating output files and for creating sections inside of the output files. So conceptually, what I want to have is a whole bunch of section structured content underneath a code block, and the code block itself is irrelevant for outline purposes, but it's relevant for purposes of getting it stuck into the appropriate generated source code file when the thing gets run through new web. So that's why I wound up with having a code object, which is totally irrelevant for documentation purposes, but having nested underneath that some documentation related to it that had sectioning commands associated with it. So it's basically in new web, the LaTeX sectioning hierarchy is orthogonal to the file structure that's being generated.
But it sounds to me as though, therefore, it's something you might want to remove from a dependence on the outline, or remove part of it. So for instance, if you store that, say, look, here's the thing I know I'm going to need. I don't know exactly when and where, but I know I'm going to need it. I'll put it here. And then you can work out how you go and get the stuff that's here when you need it. Which might, I suspect, remove some of the complexity from what you're doing.
Yeah, mainly I want it to be able to be generated at runtime so I could drag things around in the outline and have all of those section heads updated automatically for me, as opposed to having to manually switch prototypes. So now I'm in a chapter prototype. Now I want to be a section prototype. Now I want to be a subsection prototype. If I drag it in the outline to another location, I want that to automatically get figured out on its own without my having to think about it. So it would find, it has 3 or 4 semantic section divisions above it in the ancestry tree. And if you're, so now where I've been moved to, I should be a section. Oh, I've been moved elsewhere in the hierarchy. Now I should be a subsection.
Well, if you,
underneath.
okay, so, but you
more.
may want to, if this is happening after you've exported, but you need to export the necessary info. It seems to me that what you want, you want to abstract away the states, like this is what a subsection is, which you probably have done in style terms. The note can easily export its own section. There's actually export code for that. If you want to, 1.2.5.7, whatever, it can do that. There's a built-in export code for that, which is in the export code listing. Or there is a fudge way you could do it to back create that. But if you want to do it in the action code space, so you know what you are when you start. So when the page is exported, I know I'm 1.1.3. I think what you're saying is, if in the web page I then drag 1.3 to be sort of 1.2, or sorry, if I go from level 3 to level 2, I just need a way to know up. And wouldn't you do that on the website with JavaScript or something? So, oh right, I'm a level 2 object. I have a style for a level 2 object, and just apply that.
Well, in this case, it's, let's see,
Hey guys, we're getting a bit astray and following a very edge casey problem. So can we move on?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, Peter.
At least I have.
We can pull it offline if we need to. As much as I'm interested in it, I don't want to lose.
Now that
the
I have
audio.
that local value attribute NA operator, I should be able to build it myself without a problem now. Because that was like the little missing bit of secret. I'm sure there was something out there that would make it easier for me, and that's what I need. Once again, Tinderbox already has the tool in the toolbox that you need when you find that you need it.
Perfect. So you found your spanner. Awesome. Bruce.
I actually wanted to work on something that Mark just said. Mark A. Mark, you mentioned about the like 1.1, .1 being able to be exported, and it's kind of interesting. I've come full circle on that, because it used to bother me that I couldn't find the numbers in the Tinderbox itself. I wanted that to be how it was, until I realized it didn't matter. It only seems to matter when you want to share it with people and you want to be able to reference, this is 3.1, this is 5.2, and then it makes sense. I tried exporting the outline, and then I wanted to have it import into Omni Outliner, and was not able to do it successfully. The numbering disappeared. And so I'm just wondering if you or anyone has any tips on how to make that happen more effectively.
So just to reframe your question, you want to know how do I export an outline out of Tinderbox that retains the outline numbering scheme?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you for the rephrasing.
So I have
Chat log.
the answer to that. We don't necessarily have time for that right now. It's something that Mark A and I solved about, I want to say 18 months ago. And there's a couple things that you'll want to think about when you're going through that this exercise. And I'll share my. I won't be able to give you the answer right now because it will take up the whole. I got to go find files and resurrect it because, and it's funny you asked it, Bruce, because it's something I've actually wanted to be re-interjecting into my own templates. Because I haven't needed it for a while, but I'm now finding that I do. So I'll be able to address that. But if you're looking at a Tinderbox file, one of the things that you want to think about, and just bear with me. So you want this to be one, heading 1, right? And then you want to, and let's go into outline views to make it easier.
Now, just to be clear, I would not have put the number in it. The number.
Yeah, I know, but for visual illustration purposes. So, because this is another education thing too, is often what I find, or where I'm starting to get better at, is let me start by creating some notes that are manually contrived to what I want my output to be. So what I'm hearing you say is you want something like this, right? You want your output to be like that. Now, when you're actually creating your notes, what you want.
Actually, no.
Okay.
It would be 1, then it would be 1 point, your number 2 would be 1.1.
I got it.
Number 3 would be 1.1.1.
Yeah. And it went, okay, perfect. So I have solved this already. But see, this is why manually hard coding an answer for yourself. Let's call this doc. And let's recontrive it a bit. We'll go like this, doc. And we will go like this. And then what we're saying is what you want is, and then this is 2.1. And again, the answer is, Bruce, I have it for you, and I'll
And you do know that I wanted a simple answer, right?
Yeah, but
Okay.
it
is me.
But here's the issue: there's a simple answer, and there's actually how do you do it given the certain context. So what I heard you say is you want to be able to output a document like this, and so on, heading 3 and 4. So you
output it like this and input it into Omni Outliner.
Into Omni Outliner or something like that. Now the question would be, what does Omni Outliner do? But does Omni Outliner need the numbering, and why isn't Omni Outliner taking that? But we'll address that in just a second. One of the approaches, or the first thing you need to think about when you do that, is Tinderbox has we'll go here and we'll pop in a note and we'll call it sibling order.
There are a couple of things in the sidebar as well, Bruce.
Yeah, and
Mark, I've got both of them. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a couple things to think about that you need. So there's 2 numbering schemes that Tinderbox provides us that are really, really helpful for doing something like this, namely sibling order and outline order. And you can use these numbers to help Tinderbox know where it is within the file. The problem being, though, that you have is when you have a larger file. So even like in this case, we've created a repository, and let me go ahead just to facilitate this a little bit. I'm going to quickly add a prototype.
Michael, a question on something you just showed under attributes.
Uh-huh.
Did the number, because I haven't used that outline attribute, and it sounds like I need to learn it. Is it hard coded? In other words, when you tell it's a 2, it's always a 2 no matter where it is in the outline? Or does it change dynamically?
That's why I turned this on. Let me explain this to you. Right. So let's go here, and I'm going to apply this P note prototype that we just created. So now every note's got those variables shown. The other way you could have done that was just so while people are watching, you could go to use columns, and I could do plus, and I could go outline order, and I could then do sibling order. Okay, and that's just another way if you want to be able to see attributes side by side with the document. So think about this. So here I'm doc, and I'm note number 1 and I'm outline order number 1, right? Here I'm note and I'm sibling number 2, I'm outline number 8, right? So what's happening is the outline order is counting the outline notes, and the sibling order is so the outline order is counting start 1, count every note going from top to bottom. And so this is the 8th note in the document in terms of outline order. Whereas from a sibling, this is the 2nd note. That's the 3rd note. So the challenge that I ran into when I'm doing the reports, because you all are aware of the way I use Tinderbox. Like I literally have my blog posting file probably at this point has 3 books, any version of probably 50 to 60 articles and 300 or so social media posts all over the map, right? And the issue then is, how do you help Tinderbox know the numbering? So for example, here I'm heading 1. So you would naturally think, well, I can use the sibling order. Well, you could, or you might naturally think I can use the outline order. Well, you could, but the problem is if you do that, depending on where you are in your document tree, that numbering scheme may get out of whack. So the convention I've used, and I'll demonstrate it to you later, is whenever I go to run a template, I essentially say the note that I have selected is my top level note, is my number 1 note. And then everything following that gets treed off of that. So I have a function I call my Tbx Config File. So what I do is I have, and why don't we? I'm traveling next week, so the week after next I'll demonstrate this. This will on how to manage outline numbering. But essentially, what you do is when you select a note, you have Tinderbox say, okay, this is the top of the report. So set your outline, you're heading to 0 basically, and then you say, so here I've got my document. We'll call it the report. I've got my report selected. If my report's selected, that is now, and again, what you might want to say is like list of books, and then I'll just show you an example of how this gets buried and why this is important to talk about. Because what you want to do is you want Tinderbox to be able to automatically create your outlining order regardless of wherever you are in the hierarchy of the existing notes. Because as you move notes around, they get buried, the numbering scheme gets changed. And so much like what Peter was doing is you want to help Tinderbox by giving it a starting point. And so what you do is, if I were to say, this is the, so I'm in a list of books, this is the report, or call it list of reports to be consistent, right? This is the report. So when I click on this report, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, Tinderbox, this is the report, restart all of the counters at 0. And then what you do is when you hit your first child of report, make its heading number 1. When you hit the second child of the report, make its heading number 2. And then following that, you then have its children say, okay, my parent is heading, my parent's heading number is number 1. So make me 1.1. And my parent is number 1.1. So make me 1.1.1. And so there's essentially a methodology where you basically, feed Tinderbox the numbers by letting each individual note say who's my parent and what's their number, and that's how it works. And just to show you the again, we don't have time to go through it now because we actually have it scheduled, or we could try it at the end of the meeting. But I'll kind of bear with you, show you the brief answer to that is. So the answer to the solution is essentially this. Right, where do I have?
Oh yeah, piece of cake.
No, just a minute. I gotta find it. Here it is. Here it is. So what I do is I say, make my heading depth equal to the heading depth of the parent plus 1 plus some kind of heading offset. So and the heading depth of the parent is getting set. Okay, and I got to figure out where, and that's why I don't want to do it right now, because I've got to figure out where the pieces are. But the heading depth of the parent is essentially getting set to 0 in my Tbx config file. And then what the templates will do is then they'll cascade off this numbering scheme. So that way I know I'm starting at 0. So now if my parent is 0, then I am 0 plus 1. And if my parent is 1, then I am 1 plus 1, which is 2. And then you can increment your ability to do that. So the whole answer to this is get your parent, your the root of your report to be 0 out, and then have each subsequent child number itself in increments of 1. And then you use action code to construct this 1.1, 1.2 structure. And I've got it figured out. And again, I'll give it to you later, but that's how that works.
Thank you.
Let's I know it's a little confusing, but that's the issue. And
no, it's like I said, it's like I asked, how do you bold a word? And you tell me, well, first you got to learn JavaScript. Well,
but in this case you do, because the reason is, and here's the important context. The context is, again, think like a computer. I want my notes to be numbered sequentially 1, 1.1, 1.2. My next topic level heading 2, 2.1, 2.2.1, right? For us, and this is what Mark Anderson talks about all the time too. For us, visually, this is very obvious. For Tinderbox, I have no idea where you are in the document. Are you 50 layers deep? Are you 20 layers deep? Are you 2 layers deep? You essentially need to, whenever you're going to go run a report, you need to first 0 out the top level to tell me Tinderbox where you are. I am now at stepping stone number 1. And then from stepping stone number 1, I will increment each of the individual files as I go down your chain. That's all it is. But
I understand. You've got several thousand hours ahead of me on this, and it comes to you very easily. This is not.
No, but it's not. No, forget about the how. The concept is this. This is critically important. Tinderbox has no idea where you are in the file. So it doesn't know if you are starting at note 567 or what. And if you think about this, so if I'm all the way down here and I'm using sibling number 1 versus note number 8, Tinderbox doesn't know the context of that. So if you're up here at report, what you're going to do is you're going to create a variable that says, start me at 0, start the clock at 0, and then start counting each subsequent child and give it a number, and then apply that number to the heading. I'm sorry, Mark, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, so it's quite simple. It's like, basically, you want an ad hoc anchor to where your numbering system starts. And this is the difference between, Tinderbox can sort of tell you, it's only tell you on export, it'll give you, this is the section number, because by design, it's exporting the whole documents. But like as not, what actually happens is we said, no, I don't quite want to do that. What I want to do is I want to just export this branch.
Right.
And then, so at a very simple level, the main thing you need to do is to be able to say, right, this is the start. And then you can just calculate it off it. So the thing is not to get sort of wind up in the fact that it involves some code. That's the wrong way to look at it. So you have to tell the application this is what you want to do, and that involves a bit of information. But once you've done that, it can then cascade quite easily off it and give you something that just works. And indeed, if you want to take it to the next level, you may be exporting the document having several of these different things running, because as long as you store them in separate attributes, doesn't matter. And they can say you can have several hierarchies, all with knowable section numbers, as it were, that are different for different exports.
Well, and to give a
Michael,
example,
can I just respond to Mark for a second? That was actually really helpful. That last part of what you said, that made a lot of sense to me.
Can you repeat it so we can hear it? And what I want to hear it too. Like, what was that made sense?
Well, it was simply, I mean, it's going to sound silly, but I didn't think about the idea of having it as sections. That one piece of information, adding that to the outline, actually, I think that when I go back into TBX ref, that's going to help me considerably. I just didn't consider that.
Yeah. And from an academic perspective, because Bruce, I know you get involved in this quite a bit as well. When you get super pedantic, and this is what forced me to like figure this out, is you can manually do it for the one-off project. You can semi-manually do it for the second/third odd project. But when you get to your 50th blog article, or when you get to your 100th piece, or when you're doing professional work and academic work at the same time, this is where the automation comes into play, and it's super helpful. So for example,
you mean the fact that it occurred to me as you were both talking that I could just go into Google Docs, create my outline, screenshot it, line it up, and then have it match that way, and then redo it? No, I never even thought about that.
Yeah, no, but where I'm going, for example, is, and often what I'll do is I'll write an academic piece, then I'll turn around and modify it and publish it for work. And from a citation perspective, the citations are very different in those two contexts, and the heading numbering is different. So for example, if you're using APA style guidelines, and a heading 4 needs to be indented in bold with a period at the end. A heading 5 needs to be indented with bold italicized with a period at the end. And so this is where Tinderbox really shines, is when you start getting to that, the numbering scheme in certain levels, that's the easy part. It's then when you want to start modifying it to that next level, that Tinderbox really makes it's just incredible. But the key to be able to, and I'll give you the template. We'll do this in 2 weeks.
Michael, it's a compliment to you. You have mastered the ability to input your data. What are you up to now? 8 Cs, 10 Cs, however many Cs you have. You have managed to take it from beginning to end, and you've made it a reusable system. I mean, it's admirable. I'm not there.
No, but you don't need to be. We'll get you the template, and you won't have to think about it again. That's the other key part, right?
I am a fan of solutions like that, I do have to say.
Right. So, Mr. Bernstein, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I just want to point out that there is an entirely different, not necessarily better, but different approach to assembling the section headers.
Awesome.
Okay, let's suppose that everything is in a container somewhere, and this container is like the section 0, it's the title page. It just doesn't appear in the it doesn't have a section number. Its job is to hold all the rest of the stuff you're exporting. And one more thing, it's going to tell its children what their section number is. And it can do it because it knows what its children are, and it can go through each of them in turn and say, this is your section number. And we will store the string 1 period or whatever in the first one's section number attribute, and 2 period in the second one's section number attribute, and so forth. Then we tell each of our children, go tell your children to do the same thing. Take your section number and the section number I know, the sibling number I know you have, and figure out your section number. So instead of having each note walk up its ancestor list and independently compute its section number, the note at the top can instruct all the other notes to have their children construct their section numbers, and then tell each of them to have their children construct their section numbers. And this ends when there are no more children. Everyone has a section number.
So playing with that idea. So here we've got, and then I could say, and so this is where you need to, we're just brainstorming the idea here. So I don't want the root to have that action code. So root is section number 0, right? And so I'm saying if I have an action code now in this note that says section number equals section number parent plus 1. So now my section number is 1, and my section number here should be, and actually it shouldn't be parent, it should be sibling order.
Yeah.
See, that's where it gets confusing, because
plus, I you understand the idea. This is not the right rule, but you understand the idea. I just wanted to get the idea into people's heads.
Yeah, and we can
Just
just play with it.
curiosity, does it not matter what the number of the very first section is, so long as it's the first section, whether it's a 0 or a 1? Or does it have to be 0?
I don't think it's going to matter, but it depends exactly how we do this.
Okay, and then I say, and then we'll go ahead and then let's just brainstorm a little bit and then we can
But
go.
also, Bruce, if everything's sort of 1 too high or 1 too low, that's normally easily solved by adding a +1 or a -1 somewhere in the code. So
But again,
don't worry unduly.
But again, this is where it gets tricky, right? Because it's one of those things where you think about, well, in the future, well, what if I don't want numbers? What if I want Roman numerals? Or what if I want A's and not, 1.1.a? So things like that. But even then, getting these, I've played with this too, getting these periods right can also be quite confusing. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I'll bite. If you really need to do that, you make a list of, the sequence.
Yeah.
So here's a good one. So footnote symbols, which go asterisk, dagger, double dagger, parenthesis, paragraph marker, etc., section marker. You could make a list that holds those values, and most of them are normally quite finite. But let's say they go to 7. But all you do is you say, right, if I'm a sibling 7, then give me item number 6, because it's zero numbered when we talk to a list. Give me item number 6 out of the list, and lo and behold, you will get a symbol instead of a number, and you can do that. So again,
but I don't want to.
But so it's not the complication you think it is. It's a bit of work, but it's not as abstract, I think, as perhaps it might seem at first case.
Yep. Okay, now we can, why don't we go ahead this? Let's go to our planned programming for the day. And then we will revisit.
I had no idea when I asked this question what I had done.
No, it's an awesome question. It's actually one that I've been wanting to solve for another purpose. But the issue is, and again, Mark Anderson it brings it up quite often. It's one of those things. You do the first thing and you're like, great, I got it. And then very quickly you're thinking, yeah, now what about this? And now what about that? And the more what abouts you can think about before you get started, you then can determine how far down that chain you want to go, because that will ultimately determine what your solution is going to be and how much flexibility you want out of it. But it is once you actually figure it out, and I've done it in my template, we just don't have time to do it right now on the call. I've got it figured out to like maybe 3 lines of code to do that. But again, I can't recreate it on the fly here without confusing the crap out of everyone. So let's put that on, including myself. So let's put that on the side for now. We'll revisit it in 2 weeks. So Mark, if we can remind, next week I'm gone, but the first week in November, let's have the session being automatic outline numbering in Tinderbox. So in the forum a couple days ago, we had a really killer question that raised that on the surface sounds super obvious, simple, all of that, but under the auspices of Mr. Art's requests, it creates a tremendous number of learning outcomes and objectives that we can have through the process. So Joseph had asked a simple question of, if I'm parsing in notes into Tinderbox, how can I parse the name of a note and split that apart? And so long story short, we ended up with like this, let's say this is your note name, some curly bracket, 1492 Columbus sail, curly bracket, Columbus departs for Palos, Spain. And now I'm going to move back and let's look at the README here. And the README is, essentially, and then I'll give you the answer in just a minute. So the description of the problem is, how do we parse the text in an attribute and place the different parts in different attributes? So in other words, how do we parse the text in a name take the different elements that we've parsed out and stick the values of those elements into different places. And and it turns out there's like 11 learning outcomes that I've been able to achieve as I was thinking through this morning on how to answer it. One is know how to use the split function. Two is to appreciate the retention of your source data, because if you're not careful when you're doing an exercise like this, you can nuke your source data and you've kind of screwed yourself. Missed type operators can lead to data being inexplicably destroyed. So if you've, like if I have a typo and you accidentally, mistype split, there goes your data. Logging is your friend. So we'll talk about logging in just a minute. Commenting code is your friend. So you want to be nice to your future self and comment your code as you're writing. There's more than one way to do things. So there's a lot of different ways to achieve something. You want to understanding regex operators. And thanks to Philip Lloyd about 6 to 8 weeks ago, he really emphasized how important regex was. So I spent a weekend relearning it myself, and it's become excruciatingly valuable. The use of variables, appreciate the value of cleaning up after yourself. And then there's some bone, and that's like Romper Room. And by the way, going back to the Romper Room game, Romper Room television show, I'm actually making a movie with a friend of mine called the Romper Room Gang, which is based on a bank robbing gang in the 1980s in Oakland, California. And we've got the life rights to that, one of the gang members, and we're in the process of writing a script and making a movie on that called the Romper Room Gang. So keep an eye out for that. Bonus, writing in Markdown gives a ton of flexibility. And then the final bonus is visual affordances really help. So again, our objective then basically is to parse this text, 1492 Columbus sales, blah, 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 into name that is in the note name of a note. And what we want to do is place everything in between the brackets and name and everything else in text, and then clean up all the lingering data. So that's a lot of words to be able to say, how do I just basically clean up this text? But I think this gives us a tremendous learning opportunity for playing with Tinderbox. So let's clean this file up a little bit. So I've got a note here called this, and typically you might start in map view when you do that. So here you go. I've got a note called 1492 Columbus sales, Columbus departs Palos, Spain. And what we want to do is pull this piece of text out of those brackets. We want to pull this into text, and we want to get rid of the brackets so it's pretty. So when you're doing work like this, and again, when you get more comfortable, you won't need to do some of the pedantic steps that I'm going to walk us through. But I found that it is super helpful to have these pedantic steps. One, as you're learning the code, and two, just to be protective of yourself. So step one in this process is, let's go ahead, and Mark Anderson referred to this a little bit earlier. Sometimes, and so did Mr. Bernstein, sometimes it's really helpful to have a log file. And so you create yourself a log note. And what that log note will allow you to do is be able to place into the log information that's being processed by the different pieces of the of your action code. So you can see what Tinderbox is seeing and what it's spitting out. So that's a really helpful element for yourself. The other thing is, especially when I'm doing something new, once I know my code works or I'm really comfortable with it, I don't bother doing this. But in this case, I will always, and especially in these early test environments, I'll grab a copy of the code. I'll go like this. I'll paste this into the text, and I'll call this one, whoops. I'll call this one my source data, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to move my source data off to the side, so that if and when I do screw it up, and invariably I will, I can always go back and grab my source data and then start over. And so that's a really important part. So I've got my note that I want to parse, and I have my source data. With me so far? Everyone good? Yeah? Okay. So now what do we do? Now what we want to do is we want to start playing with and writing some stamps. So the first stamp, and Mark's, and again, this is the first stamp. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead here and write out of Mr. Bernstein's stamp one. We'll call this one stamp one for lack of creativity. And right out of the forum, so Mr. Bernstein had suggested, basically do this. And so here's the stamp that Mark had suggested right out of the gate. And so I dutifully did that, and watch what happens. So I'm going to select my note and I apply the stamp that Mark suggested. Everything disappears. And you're like, holy crap, what did I just do? Well, because you protected yourself, you go back to your source data and you can put it back, because not to worry, we're experimenting, it's all good, and I've saved myself some time. If you've actually been doing a hell of a lot of writing and that happens to you, it could be a catastrophe. So let's look at what we did here and what's going on. So essentially we're using an operator called split. And what we're telling Tinderbox to do is we're saying, take the name of this note, apply the operator split. And what I'm asking you to do is split at a curly bracket. And then this is the next learning that we can get out of this. In RegEx, there's this concept called back references. And back references essentially save data temporarily for you to use down the chain. And so Tinderbox, when it's using this function called, behind the scenes, it's using a back reference capability. So when you're doing a split, the two back references are what is before the thing you're splitting on and what is after the thing you're splitting on. So essentially, I'm saving two chunks of data. And you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, now that I've done the split, Tinderbox, and now I'm asking Tinderbox, take the mylist.1, which is the second thing in the split, replace the asterisk, and stick that into text. And then take the mylist.0, which is the first thing. So if you think about the split, here's the split. Everything to the left is 0. Everything to the right is 1. And if we had multiple splits, that numbering would continue. Make that the name. Now, when we ran that, and we'll do it again just so you can see it, everything disappears. And so we're like, I know my action code's correct. I know my split variable is correct. I don't know what's going on. And then you sit there for anywhere from 90 seconds to possibly 3 or 4 hours mulling over what the hell's going on. And then then you realize, I got it. In RegEx, a curly bracket is what's called an operational character. Curly brackets, parentheses, periods, asterisks, and the square brackets are all operational characters in RegEx. They actually mean something. So
and the caret and dollar sign too.
A caret and dollar sign. So when you're in RegEx, and you'll often do things like this, right? What you're doing, you're telling RegEx within the curly brackets, count numbers, do this thing 1 or 4 times and all of that. And so what you need to do in this context, I'm going to not save this because I don't remember what the original split was. So what you need to do in this context is you need to escape that character. You need to tell Tinderbox, because remember, the computer is Tinderbox is doing what you're telling it to do. And Tinderbox is looking at that curly bracket and saying, oh, you're an operational curly bracket in RegEx. Okay, I'm going to perform the operation. Well, wait a minute. There's no valid operation here. I'm going to lose my stuff and just puke everywhere and delete everything. That's what's happening in this context. So what you need to do is you tell Tinderbox to escape that character. And so a / in RegEx is saying, hey, Tinderbox, the next character you see is not an operational RegEx character. Treat it as a real character. Treat it as a curly bracket. So if we go and now do this, right, and hit enter, and then we got to go put our code back. And then we grab our source data and now apply it. Voila, it works because
Michael,
Yeah.
very minor thing. You call that a forward slash, but isn't it
or
isn't
backslash.
the backslash?
It's a backslash.
Gold star to Bruce.
Yeah, so it's a backslash. So what you want to do is
That's the
put
limit.
the backslash to escape that curly bracket. And so you're telling Tinderbox that this is a real piece of code. So voila, that's great. So then a couple of the other affordances in this lesson plan is, since we're going through the process, let's remember some nomenclature is your friend. So what you might, or I mean, some visual affordances are your friends. So what you might want to do is move this here, and then you might want to also create yourself a README that allows you to get, this is like your sign, like for Bill Schwartz, who's our scientist. You create a README, so you're actually taking notes to self along the way as you're producing this file. You might create another / here. So this is the note you're actually actively working on. This is your raw data. We can get rid of that one there. And then there's my log file. Now, while I'm at it too, just to help me, I might want to go ahead here and add in a prototype. So I'll create a prototype called pnote. And in this prototype, what I want to do so I can actually see what's happening in my operations, I'm going to apply the pnote prototype here so I can actually see what's actually occurring when I'm going through the process. So now if we go back here, let's go back to what we've asked Tinderbox to do. We've said, hey, Tinderbox, create the list equals name, split dot, we've escaped the characters. And so essentially we're populating these values, these back reference values into the split. And if you remember, if we look at the original source data, what we're actually telling Tinderbox to do is we're asking Tinderbox to split here. And Tinderbox works on bases 0 through 9. So 0 is actually is effectively number 1 up to 9 back references. It will store up to 9 back references in a series of operations. So what Tinderbox will do is it will park all of this in back reference 0, and it will park all of that in back reference 1. And actually, no, that's wrong. I'm sorry. This is not a back reference issue. Thank you, Mark Bernstein, for not jumping in on that. What we're doing here with this list 1 and 2 is what we're doing is we're saying Tinderbox, grab, if you're looking at the list, what it's going to do is it's going to split at this, and it's going to put each item into the list. And so this 0 is the first item in the list, 1 is the second item on the list up to 9. That's I'm sorry, I got myself confused with the back reference comments. So if we look at this in the list, we're going to copy out the list and we go here. What you're seeing here in that list that got created was this, and you see the semicolon there. And so what you're seeing is this is list 0 and that's list 1. And so if we go back here, then what we're doing is we're saying, hey, Tinderbox, take the list 1, stick that into text, take list 0 and stick that into the name. And that's what's happening in that first step. So let's go ahead. And so we have this file to play with later. This one is, we'll call this one stamp 0. Does not work because sometimes what you want to do is actually store the values that don't work so you can remember why they didn't work. Okay, so there's our store does not work. Here's our stamp 1. And again, it's not a back reference issue. Sorry, I've confused myself. These are the positions within the list. So 0 being the first item in the list, 1 being the second item in the list, and so on. So you're asking Tinderbox, grab the first item, second item in the list, stick it in text, grab the first item in the list, stick it in the name. So that's what the stamp is doing. But frankly, it's really helpful to be able to log these things along the way. Sometimes it's really helpful to actually be able to reset stuff as well. So let's say I want to now go ahead here, and I know I'm going to be at this for a while as I'm figuring this out. So I might actually want to create myself a reset stamp, and I'll go over here and paste in some Julia Child cooking show text that I had originally written. So my reset stamp is essentially saying, I want to clear the log file. We'll get to logging in just a minute. What I want to do is I want to make the name of the text equal to the text of the source data. So here's one of the really cool Tinderbox lessons that we can get in this within this lesson. Remember, Tinderbox is all about manipulating and moving data around. And so what I'm doing here with this reset stamp is I'm saying, make the name of the currently selected note equal to the text in the note name source data. And then while I'm at it, clear my text, clear my list, and clear my string, because I want to reset back to where I started. And so if I hit enter there, and now I go like this, you'll see My name has now been reset to the source data, and my list and my string are now clear. So now I can keep experimenting and making mistakes. So if I go back here and I do my does not work stamp again, and I select that stamp, hang on. Oh, I didn't say, I pasted that does not work stamp into the wrong one. So we'll go here, does not work stamp. Go like this. Let's put our does not work stamp there. Go like that. So this is my reset stamp. That's my does not work stamp. And this is the one that I know works. So if I'm up here and I apply my does not work stamp, everything clears out. I did get my list, but everything cleared out because of the back referencing issues. And so now what I can do is I can just go back up here and apply my reset stamp, and I can start over. So that way it's a way for me to be able to iterate as I'm doing my code development. So now we've got a stamp that we know works, and let's just do it again, and we know it works. So I've got my name the way I want it. I've got my text the way I want it. But let's go through and think about, well, how can we actually make this a little bit more cleaner? And work on that. So let me take a look at what I had for step the original number 2. Okay, so for original number 2, what we want to do is I'm going to grab my example stamp that I pre-played for this, and we'll call this one stamp 2. So we've now got a new stamp. We'll call this one stamp 2. And now look what I'm doing in this stamp 2. And stamp 2, if I haven't created myself a source data file, what I'll do is I'm going to say, take my name and make it into my string, just so I can park it there for the time being. And then later I can clear that out. Again, that's this, and I'll comment it out. This is so I don't destroy my source data, right? So if you're working with some text, park whatever you're working on somewhere else for the time being, so you can always recover it. And so that's like the first thing you want to do. Then the next thing you do is we do exactly what we did before. And then when we're ready, we can go ahead and then this is the cleanup after yourself. I've parsed out my data. I've got my name and all of this that I want, but now I've got this extra text sitting around in my string that I don't actually need, won't ever need. So I might as well just clean it out. So what you say is my string equals 0 and my list equals 0, right? Because I don't need my original text anymore either. So I'm going to clear that out. So now if we reset this back here. Okay, so now we're back at our stable state, and I now hit stamp 2 and I hit apply. Man. What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong here? My list equals, my string equals, this was in a different demo file here. That's did. My list 0. Text equals my list 1. Crap, it worked in my other file. Just a minute. When you paste things over to another file, so we reset. Okay, so that's my string. And now I'm going to go to stamp 2. And what am I saying? I'm saying make my string equal the name. That's fine. And let's park these out so we don't delete them, so we can see what's happening.
Oh, you said my line 2. Your error should be my string split.
No, it doesn't. I could do. Oh, that's right. That's right. Sorry. Okay. Make my string equal. Okay, there we go. So we do that now.
And yes, yeah.
Okay, there we go. No. What am I doing wrong?
Didn't you want to set text to something?
I did. It's funny when you do it live. I have a demo sample that was working great. Set. Yeah, I did want to set. Oh, here, text. Sorry. Yeah, set text. I had it right. So my list equals name.split. So we split it. So that gets my list. So here's how you break it down too. So when you run into situations like this, you can comment all your text and do it piecemeal. So we go like this. Well, that's interesting. Why is it? So okay, my list equals name.
Yeah.
So there you go. That. And you see, we've got our my list. So we're getting the my list we expect. So then we can go to the next string.
Okay, one of the things you're hitting, Michael, is sometimes if you're acting on the thing you're looking at there's an update. It's
Oh, yeah, I might
just
not be
sometimes,
updated.
for instance, if you're setting text, it may not, because there are other things going on. Sometimes if you just click away and back. So that's an occasional trip hazard.
Yeah, okay, we can just do this. My list equals, let's do one step at a time here. My list equals text equals my list one. What is wrong with that? Damn it.
Are you
I
running
love
that?
I am. Let me do it on the one that I know that works. All right, so if I do that, that's so weird. It works in this file, but not the other one.
A typo.
All right. What? It's got to be a typo
typo.
somewhere. Yeah. So it's got to be a typo somewhere. So essentially, let's go through the file that I know that works, and I'll fix the other demo file there because we're getting closer now. So you say my string equals name, my list equals name.split, my text equals my list one replace, and then what we're doing is we're asking my list to replace the bracket, and then my list 0 equals replace the bracket, and then I'm asking you to clear out my string. And again, if we do this, you see here, and we can reset the note again. And so now if we apply this one, we can do that. Why didn't that comment out? Oh, okay, it could be because I can't have two comments. Wait a minute, I don't, okay.
I think quotes in comments still occasionally confuse things.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, that could be what's going on. No.
Nope.
Yeah, all right. Don't worry about it. So what we're seeing then is that is then cleaning up that list. So we'll go ahead and here and do reset that. It's funny, I've got to see, I'm curious what my typo is in the other file. We'll figure it out. Okay. Okay, and you'll see that we're able to split it out and clean everything up. So the first one, the reset we've learned allows us to reset our note in the beginning. The first one we've realized is that we don't have the backslash. That's what's causing the error here. The second one, we put in the backslashes and it works. And the third one, what we're doing is we're just kind of variabilizing it a little bit more. You're parking your original text into my string to make it work. You're creating your list, you're creating your text, you're creating your name, and then you're cleaning out the chaff because you don't actually need that text floating around in your file. In a small file, that doesn't mean much. In a super large file, it could be really impactful in terms of the performance. Yeah, Mr. Mark.
Not that impactful unless you've got 5,000 notes.
Well, that's what I was about to
Looking
say.
through Mark Anderson.
No, that's what I was about to say. So I have 5,000, 6,000.
my fault.
If this is the least, if this is causing you the least anxiety, why not use a var?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you broke up, Mark. I didn't hear any of that. What this is the least what?
If this is causing you the least anxiety, by all means, use a var.
Well, that's now okay. Now we go to
We
now we go to
were
the next point now.
originally addressing the problems of a very new user in a very new project, which by construction doesn't yet have 5,000. But
No, I agree. I agree.
And which may quite possibly not yet have gotten to the syntax of local variables. But if you're worried about 5,000 notes, by all means, still use vars instead of all attributes on this.
And that is a great transition to the next example. Use variables instead.
You're
So
absolutely right, Mark.
Let's go to the third.
And I think the problem nested in that is the difficult thing is always to sort of because what tends to happen is somebody starts out, does that, and then they acquire the requisite number of notes, and I think it's scratching their heads. But I did everything right, and right. I agree. There's no simple way. The best thing one can do is sort of leave a note for people that if things seem to be spinning their wheels a bit, you might want to think about making sure you create a self-emptying litter tray, and that will make things easier.
Well, and again, as I said in the beginning, I personally wouldn't go through all of this effort 90% of the time for a smaller file and fairly rarely in my larger files because I know what's going on. But this is a great encapsulated demo to kind of explain everything all at once. So what we're walking through is absolutely overkill for this one slightly little tiny example, but it helps us understand the mechanics. So the third one, as Mark said, let's go. So let's revisit what we just did. We have a reset variable that lets us reset from our source data, or a reset stamp. We have a stamp that we know doesn't work. We'll call this one does not work. Okay. We have we can parse the name for the original ones using our forward slashes to escape the curly brackets. We now know we can park values into attributes, and then we can clear those attributes out later. But if we know we don't actually need that data in the future, there's no need to park them in attributes. You can actually park them in short-term variables. And that's the whole point of variables. So now let me walk you through this stamp. So what this stamp is saying is, and we'll get to the logging in just a minute, but this stamp is saying clear your log. Now it's saying make a variable, a list variable called vlist, which is equivalent to my list in the previous stamp. And now make a variable called string, which is equivalent to the string you now want to process. So you're actually going to be doing all of your processing on a variable as opposed to the actual text itself. And then in this case, it's just smart to park your data into a MyString just because we want to doubly be sure that we don't destroy our original context. So this is just kind of the setup. Now what we want to do is we want to split at the curly bracket. A curly bracket is an operational character in RegEx, so you need to escape it with a backslash. And so that's what we do here. And so we're saying make vlist equal to vsource.split, which is equivalent to my list equals text.split. And you'll notice here, what I'm now doing too, is I'm saying, and log this operation. So when I'm saying now make the text of the note log equal to the term operation1 line break and the value of what was in vlist. And then I'm saying now, what's the next operation that I need to do? The next operation I want to do is I want to make the name of the note equal to the first item in the list. So now make the name of the note equal to the vlist first item in the list and replace its curly bracket, and then log that. And then I want to replace the left curly bracket in the text. So we do that, and then we log that. And then finally, I want to do the cleanup. So I want to clean up my string. So my expectation, what I'm going to see is, I'm going to see the original list. Then I'm going to see the name of the note that's going to ultimately get produced. Then I'm going to see the text that's going to be put into the text. And then I'm going to see nothing because I've cleared out my string. So now if we apply this stamp that's using variables, we can go there and you'll see we get the exact output that we want. And if we look at the log, here are the operations. So the first log was create my list. And so there's my list, the first beginning semicolon, and then there's the rest of the content. And I got, and I'm mistyped that. So this is now actually operation 2. The second operation is to stick content in the text. And the third operation was to, in the name. The third operation was to stick the context in the text. And then the second operation was to clear out the raw data out of my string. And there you go. So essentially then, and so what's happened is everyone, and if you want, you can just comment out these out. And Mark and I were doing this quite a bit this week as we were trying to comment out stuff that was not working. So we can comment all that out, go back up here, reset the text, apply our code. And so then we can look at the log and we see, okay, operation 1 gets us our split. So that's working. And then we can say, all right, so let's go back now and put in our second operation.
You removed the comments on replace left curly brackets.
Yeah. Thank you. Now we can go back to our second operation. Let's reset that. Reset it, and now apply our stamp. Okay. And then we can look at, okay, we got the name we wanted. And if we look at our log, we got our list and then we got our name. And then we can go back and say, reset that. Okay, and now apply our stamp. And now you see we got our name and we got our text, but my string's still not cleared. If we go to the log, operation 1, 2, and 3, all working great. And then we go and undo that, hit enter, reset our note, apply our stamp, and it all works perfectly, and we can see all steps of our log. And so that way, and again, when it's just super pedantic in a small test like this, but when you're in some of that gnarly meeting note stuff that Mark Anderson and I have been working on lately, these little affordances, publishing step by step to a log, breaking everything up into its little incremental elements, helps you figure out what's going on, and it helps you see what Tinderbox sees. Now, there's another thing that I hadn't thought about until we were just doing this demo, and let me break it again and show you how we're going to destroy everything we just did. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to interject a semicolon in the name, right? Because remember, Tinderbox sees and thinks things as a list. So now here's the other thing to remember. We know we have gone through this. We know this stamp works within a given context, and you're confident that it works. And so now we apply it, and then we realize, okay, it's still working. But did we get the semicolon in the name? Let's go through and reset it, because I thought I was going to break it, but it didn't. So if we got a semicolon in the name, and we go here and we apply the original stamp one, let's try that. Okay. And yeah, okay. So you see it broke. And the reason why it broke, and let's look at what broke here. When we produced the list, Tinderbox did exactly what we asked it to do. And let's go back here to let's create a new source data. We'll go ahead and reset the source data. We'll stick back in our semicolon error right before Columbus. Now remember what we've asked Tinderbox to do. Create me a list that splits at this semicolon. Well, remember, for Tinderbox, anything preceding a semicolon is a list. So if I go ahead and populate this file now, whoops, I did it on my right. Crap, I actually did it on, and this is one of the areas where you want to be careful, because I just did it on my source file. So here's my source data. All right. And I wanted to do it up here. So let's reset that font, reset that. And here we're going to make a semicolon in this list. So essentially, when I now apply our original stamp here, you'll see what has Tinderbox done. Just a minute. I've got to re-break it. Up here in the source data, we're going to put a semicolon. There it is. We're going to apply our stamp there. Okay. Now, the reason why this broke is if you look at the list for Tinderbox, this is number 1 or number 0. Then this is number 1 in the statement of the list, and this is number 2. And so Tinderbox is doing exactly what we asked us to do. Please go retrieve number 1 in the list, which is spot number 2, right? So when you're doing something like that, sometimes what you're going to want to do is process out any semicolons in text that you want to create. So let's go ahead and do that with this original stamp 1 modified, so we don't have all this other chaff that's going on. And there's a quick little thing you can do here that will make it work. So we're going to copy this, and we're going to go here. Okay, so I've got my original text. Let's reset our note. And I'm going to stick our semicolon in here. Now there's no, and again, this all depends on your context and what you're doing, but there's no other semicolons here. I don't want any other, I don't have to worry about lists right now. So what I'm going to do in my modified is I'm going to slightly modify my original text. I'm going to say name equals name dot replace semicolons with double pounds, right? Because what I want, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, for the time being, let's do it, comment these out so you can see it step by step.
I could replace as a typo.
Okay, and when you have typos like that, that will nuke your data. That's why you want to have a backup of your data. Okay, so if you go like this, you'll see what we've now done is, let's put it back in, didn't work. Just a minute.
Probably you need to D and reselect the note.
Yeah. Okay, so we go like here, hit paste. All right, so you see here, we've now changed our semicolon to a double explanation point. So now if we go back and do it, let's reset our data. Let's stick our semicolon in again and note. All right, now we redo it. And I reset it again. I didn't. There we go. Now we go select our modified to stamp, hit apply. Okay. And now you'll see that our text, we've got all the text we want, but we have the 2 explanation points left on our text. So then what we want to do is we say text equals text.replace. And now what we're doing is we're replacing the semicolons and giving it back. We're replacing the explanation points and giving.
You've
it back
added
the
an extra space in there. Not that it matters.
I know. Yeah, I know, because I was thinking like a comma or something like that, just for the sake of it. Because if you recall, let's go back to our original text. Go up here, we'll reset it. So in the original text here, I had a semicolon and then a space. And actually, you're right, that space won't be needed. And these are the kind of things that you want to say. I don't want to add an extra space in there. I just want to replace my semicolons back. Okay. And now if we go apply this, you'll see that our semicolon's back. So that's really, this one little last step of this kind of replace function is critically important. Just like the backslash was an important affordance for using regex. The use of semicolons, brackets, or parentheses is similarly important. It's a semicolon, especially with any time you're working with lists. If you're working with lists, you need to pull out any of the semicolons in your raw data, because Tinderbox is going to interpret that text as a list. And so that's the one last thing I would want to add to this. So let me pause there. Was that helpful at all for anybody? You're on mute, Philip, if you were trying to say something.
Fantastic. This is very helpful to follow through the steps like this. There's been so many different learning points, lots of little things that I've learned. So the square brackets with the 1 and the 0 for the different places in the list. Yeah, been very helpful. Thank you.
How about you, Art?
Up. I remember last week too.
Yeah, awesome. So we only have about 4 minutes left.
I like how
But
clean
I
it
wanted to
is.
see if there was any other, and I got to figure out what typo I interjected.
Well, one other
into
thing,
that.
one other sort of simplification you can, as a thing you can say, of course, is with their steps. So for instance, where you've done the replace, then you've done the split. Of course, the joy of chaining is that if you're writing for yourself, once you understand what's going on, you can just chain all those things together.
Right.
And in most it works. Occasionally, if it doesn't, what you may find is that just putting parentheses around everything up to the thing you're just chaining onto it will help. So it used to be, and I think it's sort of fixed now, occasionally you do a collect, and sometimes it was useful. It's just a way that the parentheses again are telling the parser, I want you to do this, and then I want you to do that. So go do this thing. Don't rush ahead. Do this. Collect your thoughts, and then do the next thing.
Okay.
It's very rare that it's needed, but it's one to bear in mind if you chained a whole lot of things together and it doesn't seem to be quite working. And again, you can just unchain them, build them into separate steps, and that will normally show you that if when you chain them up, they don't work, you might want to stick some parentheses in.
Right, and then here's the last thing that, you know, since we want to optimize our entire hour and a half together, here's the last thing that I might throw in here that I think is actually are particularly cool. So if you remember, we also have these things called functions, and we have these things called stamps, and they all work great. We can create a let's go back to our prototype file here, our P note, and I'm going to say trigger parse. Is trigger parse. So I'm going to create a Boolean called is trigger parse. So I now have a Boolean called is trigger parse. And so then I can go to my function and say f parse note, and I'm going to create a function. This function is going to be called function f parse note, and then you always kind of want to give your, that's the basic structure of a function. Now what you can do,
you want the parentheses, you'll need the parentheses before the curly
yeah.
bracket.
Okay, so now what we can do, now watch this, because remember, action code is action code no matter where it is. So if I go here, we know that this action code works. We've tested it, it's great, it works, it's fine. So I'm going to copy all of this. I'm going to go stick it in here as a function. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if is, what did I call it? If trigger, there you go. So in the function, I'm going to say is trigger parse equals true. Then, and we'll close the then down here. I want you to run this stamp. And at the end, I want you to make is trigger parse equals false. So this is really important. So once you've got your stuff working and you're like, okay, man, this is great. I now want to stop manually having to apply the stamp all the time. I want Tinderbox to automate it for me. So now what we can do is there's a couple things I can do. I can create another stamp that says trigger parse note, and I can go like that. Okay, so now I have a new stamp called trigger parse note, and if I'm up here and I reset this note, so this note's now reset, and it is there, and let's reset its, okay, this note's reset. I can go ahead and apply the stamp trigger parse note, and it didn't work. Huh, why didn't it work? Well, because we put the Boolean in here that says if triggered this. So now if I trigger that is trigger parse, that should have, what did I do wrong? I've got an extra, do I have, it looks like I've got an extra curly bracket somewhere. If trigger parse, why isn't that not working? Damn it, I thought I was going to be all excited and say, look what I did. Look, mom. Ah, there it is. Oh, it's interpreting that as an extra. That should have worked. So if I do this, if is trigger parse equals true, I want you to run this stamp. Ah, I know why. Obviously, duh. What I need to do is I take this function and I stick it in the rule of the note. That's why it didn't work. Okay. You see, it immediately triggered the note. So now let's go ahead and fix this. There you go. So now that we've got this, let's reset the note. Okay, so I've got my reset note. And so now I'm automating all of that action code that we just did that says when this says when this is true, I want you to run the stamp. And now it's been run. So that way this is the kind of the last bit of automation in an example like this. And let's go back to show you what I did. We went through all this work to create the stamp or the sets of action code that we knew would manually work. We've tested it all. We've stuck it in logs. We know it's going to do what we want to do. We then can create another stamp that actually tests that, can we trigger the function? We stick that stamp code into the function. We stick a Boolean around it to determine how and when we want it to trigger. And now we can do that. And now, again, this is a bit of a pedestrian sample for how that's working, but to show you this in more advanced method, and this is something we'll demonstrate down the road. This is something Mark Anderson and I have been working on. If you recall back a number of weeks back, we talked about being able to automatically parse out meeting notes. So where you have a hash, then you've got another hash, and then you've got some action items, and then here you've got some people names, and you've got all these different stuff. That same methodology that we've just went through, Mark and I have been down doing for a handful of weeks. And if you look at the, where's the library? Where's my library? This is your test file. I don't want your test file is not going to work.
Sorry, you don't want that one, no.
Yeah, that one is, let me find my folder and get you the real file, and then we'll wrap up for today. But this is, I just want to do the final grand reveal. Okay, come on, where is it? Open. Is it somewhere here? Let me find where the file is on my hard drive. Parse. Patreon. I need to find, let me close Tinderbox real quick, and then I'll open it up and show you the. That's fine. All right, let me close this real quick and see what's happening. Okay. So to show you the grand reveal, so that same process that we've all been going through is reflected here. So if I go here, so everything we were doing in that simple little pedestrian process is exactly what Mark and I have been doing, where we've gone through, we've created a bunch of action code, we've strung it all together, and you'll see here, like at the end of the code, we're asking it and triggering other functions that we're stringing together. And then when we go ahead and do that, we can now say, all right, I want to, yes, parse this meeting, please. Tinderbox now applies all the action code, goes through, parses the entire meeting, gives me all of the action items, as well as a report of all of the action items. So that's kind of where you can take that everything we just did in that very pedestrian example is absolutely 100% all of the same mechanics that Mark and I use to be able to explode all of these meeting notes out of this file here. So that's kind of the conclusion of today's discussion. Thoughts, ideas, curiosities?
Well, thanks for all the help with my little problem this morning. It's all working now with that nice little tiny snippet of code.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is going to be super useful for when you use a watched folder in notes to bring in items from RSS feeds or exported book notes from iBook or Apple Books that you shared in notes, parsing that into Tinderbox notes and populating the appropriate attributes. This pretty much answers all that mail.
So you when you said this, you were referring to this being the last example I was showing, like the zenith of all of the preamble of what we were talking about for the rest of the meeting. It was that meeting note parser is what you meant by this?
Yeah, exactly. This was the part of what I've been doing based off of what we did last week, playing around with trying to incorporate sharing things from an RSS reader, getting that into Tinderbox by way of Apple Notes. And Apple Notes get it there, and then you got to parse it into what you want to publish. So
Right. And again, the really important thing is, Mark and I have been talking about this. Tinderbox doesn't know your intentions, only you know your intentions, and it doesn't know your patterns. So I personally have contrived a formulaic pattern for my meetings, a hashtag for main topics, 2 hashtags for secondary topics and or subtopics, and then @ for people and P nomenclature for priorities. And that's what will work. Now, in your example, when you say, oh, I'm just going to pull in an RSS feed and I'm going to parse it out, the risk that you're going to come into play is, what's the pattern in that text? And does that pattern, for instance, interject semicolons in on you? Or is there an anchor tag where you don't expect it? And then that's where you may run into and then need to adjust your parsing code to be able to fit the pattern of what Tinderbox is seeing, not what you think it's seeing.
Right. No, and RSS feeds are notoriously inconsistent. So it's a much more challenging problem, but at least I know what the tools are to kind of come to grips with it.
Yep. All righty. Well, hopefully this was of value to everyone today. And sorry for the earlier hiccup. I'm dying to know what my typo was that made the previous part of the cooking show not working, but I'll figure that out. But at least I think we got there in the end.
Super cool.
All right, everybody. Thank you much.
Next time.
See ya.
See you next week.